It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Welcome into Take Command. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen, and that game was not very good. It's the Instant Reaction Show. We're live on YouTube at the Team 980 and at 106.7 The Fan. Of course, if you got to scramble at some part of this and you want to make sure you catch the rest of it, this will be in full on the podcast feeds tomorrow. Or if you're listening tomorrow on the podcast feeds, this was live on YouTube last night. So there's that. All right, Logan, that's the housekeeping. They lost 14-7 to the Giants. This is the second time this year that they've lost to the team that I think most people think was the worst team in football at the time. We can parse out why the Giants maybe were a little underrated, who they played, all that kind of stuff. They started to turn the corner a little bit last week, a la the Bears the week before Washington played them. But at the end of the day, like, it's the same old story with this team. They gave up a ton of sacks. They didn't seem to be helping Sam out a lot. Sam wasn't helping himself out a lot. They make it interesting kind of at the end. And on a day where the defense played better, the offense stinks. When the offense plays well, the defense doesn't play well. They just cannot seem to, for years on end at this point, put together a complete football game, especially on a day where, because of the opponent, a lot of people thought they were very capable of putting a complete game together. That is the highest level thoughts from me. And I tried to also encapsulate some of the feelings, I think, of a lot of fans watching this. As you sit back and take it in through your analytical lens, what are your high level thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the thing for me that really sticks out kind of above all else is is that this, styles make fights. And we kind of knew, talking about in the pregame, talking about in the podcast in the week, that while the Giants don't look like a very good football team, and while it looks like the matchup favors Washington, I felt like they were looking at it through a defensive lens. They were looking at Washington's defense, in relationship to the Giants' offense. And I think there's been a pretty good precedent of that group being quieted, or the effectiveness of the defensive line specifically being quieted through game call, through game planning, and that's what the Giants did. And then on the other side of the football, you get Sam Howell, a young player, going up against a Wink Martindale-led defense. And the one thing Sam does not do very well is handle pressures. And so, like, this was exactly kind of like the thing that I think we both thought could happen in this game, in terms of if they choose to heat you up, which I think everyone thought that Wink would do that. This is going to be tough, and there needs to be answers.
Wink Martindale doesn't realize you don't have to blitz.
I mean, he didn't blitz versus Josh Allen, because Josh Allen is Josh Allen. And for him, not blitzing is like 25% of the time.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, even when he doesn't blitz, he blitzes more than a lot of coaches.
Right, and so I think, like, this is exactly like was my worst fear. Is you get in these really weird game flow situations. You get in this habit of, like, running the football on first down. You get in the 2nd and 10. 2nd and 10 is, there's a very high statistical tendency here to, like, throw the football on 2nd and 10. When you throw the football on 2nd and 10, Wink knows that he's going to heat you up. It's hard to kind of pass block these all out looks without quick answers. And then you're in 3rd and 15, and then you take another sack. And so I think that was something that was, again, like, worst case scenario, but it kind of unfolded before me as the game went on. And I think the thing that's kind of disappointing is that, I think everyone knew what was going to happen, and the Giants still did it. And I think that's the thing that was frustrating. And again, like, we've talked about kind of high level things that could be done. I think you saw some of that stuff in the second half. They got really frustrating. They got really sprint heavy in the second half as a way to manage the rush. But, maybe that's something that should have been talked about earlier in the week. I'm not sure. But, that's kind of my thought, is that, like, this was a game that Vegas had close, that we thought could be close if it played like this. And it played exactly like that. It played exactly like the way it needed for the Giants to win the football game. And it's not like they got lucky. It's like, that's what the Giants do. They run the football. They're not super efficient offensively, but they kind of go on long drives. They possess the football. They found some ways to make explosive plays. That's how teams that are not as good win. And the crazy thing is, they only scored 14 points. They only scored 14 points in that game. So,
like, you just had to not stink offensively. And there was one way to make sure that you didn't stink, which is protect Sam at all costs. And they failed. Like, they just flat out, from a planning standpoint, failed to do that. And, like, this is I'm going to use this word, and I'm going to use it in a professional sense. I'm not calling Eric Bieniemy this and like his character, who he is as a human, but professionally, as a play caller, there is an arrogance that bothers me. And when you look at that defense and you go, "We're just going to do what we do," that's arrogant. Like, there's no other word for it. Like, you just have to be able to look at it and go, "Yep, no, that their strength is our weakness. How do we mitigate their strength and hide our weakness?" And instead, it was like, no, we like to drop back pass. We think we have whatever matchups, whatever. And you just set Sam back there to get annihilated. And I don't think the offensive line played particularly well. I also don't think they were set up for success. And when you have 6 sacks and all this pressure and all this stuff, there's enough blame to go around everywhere. There are some plays that are going to wind up being on the line. There are definitely some that are going to wind up being on Sam. It's like, bro, you're under fire. When your back foot hits, you've got to get the ball out somewhere. So there's some of that. But there's also just an unwillingness to use the run game, and especially from under center. They had more success from under center when they started going to that. And the screen game, which was supposed to be a big part of their offense, allegedly, like that is every Madden play caller's favorite response to pressure is like, dream. They're going to send a bunch of dudes. Let's throw it over their head 5 feet and run the other way. Their first screen is on to Antonio Gibson, I think in the second half or late second quarter.
Late second quarter.
3rd and 20. It's like, where is that in a 2nd and 8 where Wink's trying to heat you up and get you in 3rd and 13? Like, that kind of stuff just didn't happen. There's no easy answers. And as a result, it looked like an offense that was lost. And I can't understand how you have that plan going into that game. And once you see like, nope, that ain't going to work, how you don't go to plan B much faster, because they clearly, whether they had to draw it up or they went to it, that what they were going to in the late 3rd, 4th quarter, like where their last 25 plays are part of an 8 and a 17 play drive. If that's your game, you get some field goals, like you probably punch it in, you're in dangerous positions far more often. Instead, they didn't threaten the entire game, and that's how you wind up losing 14-7 to the New York Giants.
Yeah, and I think, like I share a lot of those same frustrations. And I think the thing I just want to point out, and I have to remind myself when you're coming out of this game, is there are answers for blitzes and drop back concepts, right? Like there's hot routes, there's flat routes, there's quick throws, and there's side adjustments. There's all sorts of stuff that could have been going on in this game that we can't see from the TV copy. So while I am frustrated, like I know I've been a part of offenses that are pretty detailed with regards to drop back stuff and pressure. So I'm kind of waiting to reserve judgment, but the stuff about the screens, I think is.
But here would be my pushback, Logan. Even if those answers exist within the offense, he hasn't used them well. He being Sam hasn't deployed them well all year. At some point as the play caller, you have to stop the definition of insanity thing and try to stop doing the same thing, expecting different results.
I guess what I'm saying is that, like, for example, let's just say, I don't know, like any concept you want to run. Let's talk about bow, right? We're running bow concept. It's a 5-yard sit and a dig behind it, and we got a flat. This week, we're talking about, hey, like there's different points of emphasis versus different coverages for the same concept. And so if I'm EB, like I might have emphasized that, we might have talked about it. Sam in his presser kind of alluded to like we had a plan. It didn't go the way we thought. We had to adjust. And so I'm gonna wait until I see what the plan was allegedly, and then we can kind of talk about that. But I still think, to your point, like there's other tools in the box. You know what I mean? It doesn't need to be, not every, like I know this is an old adage, like when you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Like that's kind of what this felt like. It's like sometimes, hey man, let's get to that screen. Let's get to that sprint. Let's get to that keeper. Let's do something different to change the launch point. Play action pass where you kind of do a half roll. Like I call it a waggle. Like that stuff is important. It's impactful. And to your point, it felt very stagnant. And again, game flow might have been a contributor to that, because they were in like a whole bunch of 3 and outs, like kind of back to back to back to back. And, they didn't run the football super effectively in the first half. Like, to be honest, like as much as I want to say, like they need to be better there, like, because like you run the ball on first down for a no gain, it's 2nd and 10. Like, and that's just been the kind of the MO for the last, 6 quarters, quite frankly, since the Falcons game. So like, obviously that's an area that needs to improve. And I think that will improve. Like, this is an NFL organization and these are smart people. They'll make it happen. But I think to your point, like you might've had a plan in the context of these plays, these dropbacks, but I also think however good that plan is, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Like this actually happened to me recently when I was coaching in the high school. Like I had a plan. I was like, if they're going to line up like this, we will absolutely dice them. And then they changed their coverage for us. And I didn't have a good answer. And I felt like I had my pants down a little bit and I couldn't make adjustments because it's high school. You can't make adjustments at halftime really the same way you can as in the NFL. But this stuff does happen. You're like, this is a really good solution to what they're presenting. And it just doesn't go the way you think it's going to go. And then you got to adjust. And so I think, like, to your point, I think I agree with a lot of that. Earlier screens, earlier rolls, earlier keepers, earlier waggle, all that stuff super important. But I'm not gonna well, hopefully they did have a good answer in some of that drop back stuff, and we'll see. And maybe in the film review, it's like no, they didn't. And then what was?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I want to know how many quick comebacks they have, how many slants they have. Like, where's the shallow crosses? Where's the stuff that could have gotten the ball out of Sam's hands quickly? And I don't feel like it was there. Like, it's not like there's a couple of times, sure, where there's guys right in front of Sam. You're like, dude, just throw it. But it definitely seems like there's a lot of like empty screen where those guys belong and blue jerseys piling on top of Sam Howell. I think that my other frustration, though, is like, what are the best stretches of offense they've had this year? Eagles game. They had a stretch against Atlanta at first half. And then obviously the stretch against Denver. All of those, maybe with the exception of Denver, those good stretches they've had have been with a good heavy dose of the quick stuff that gets the ball out of Sam's hands. And the other one is against the Broncos, who were maybe the worst defense in football and certainly were playing like it at the time.
Sure.
So I don't pretend in my chair that I have all the answers. I know that Eric Bieniemy knows more football than me, but sometimes I just feel like from our chairs, for whatever reason, like it's a forest through the trees thing where we have a better feel for what works. And it's like, I can look at the trend when Terry's involved, when you get the ball to these guys early, the offense goes better. And sometimes that's forcing it a little bit, but like, that's why Terry's Terry. When he got involved in the game, their offensive fortune started to change. So how do you get him involved in the game earlier? Like, to me, that's how I would be thinking about this offense. And it just seems like we're going to drop back, read it out and see what happens. And what's going to happen is Sam's going to continue to take a record number of sacks. And instead of he's on pace to be David Carr, he's going to be David Carr. Like, Don't do that to Sam. That's not fair to him. And you just got to, as and we talked about this in one of the commercial breaks during pregame, where it's just like, if you're giving up 9 sacks at some point as a coordinator, that's on you. There's like no execution level that you go, that's 100% on the players just not executing. You have not set them up for success. And they did change stuff up in the second half. Like Logan Thomas, it was Andrew Wiley. I heard in the locker room talking about it. Like, they did keep tight ends in. Like, they were able to stem it after the first drive of the second half. Why did it take so long? And that's something that we're going to have to figure out on the film review to an extent. But like, philosophically, there is no good answer. Like, it clearly wasn't working.
Yeah, but again, like you said, I always, with coaches and this kind of stuff, I always kind of give them the benefit of the doubt until I watch the film. And I do think that they must have had some solution. They must have had some reasoning for why they were doing the things they were doing. And hopefully we can kind of distill that down for you in the podcast on Tuesday. But I think, like, to your point, like, you made some adjustments, you made some changes, and it works a little bit better in the second half. And even that is not great. It's a little bit methodical. 7. Yeah, it's a little methodical, a little bit deliberate, but it was a frustrating game to watch as a fan of the team and a fan of offensive football. And I'm sure the players feel very frustrated too about it. And I'm sure EB's frustrated. Like, no one wants, like, speaking from experience, like, no one wants to go out as an offensive football player and score less than 25 points. Like, no, like, any outing like that, like, I've been a part of some bad offenses, and every one of them makes you feel sick because, football is like the consummate team game. It's consummate, right? And so when I go in the locker room after a game like this, I look at the defensive players and I would just say, like, I'm sorry, dude. Like, we dropped the ball because you did your deal. You kept them to 14 points. You made some really critical plays in critical situations. Special teams, same thing. Tress punted his leg off, did a great job. They recovered that muff punt. That's all good stuff. And again, I'm sure people are going to be critical of the defense, especially in the first half. But it was
3 and out. Like, Tress punted 7 times, and it just felt like they ran out of gas because they were on the field so much.
I agree. And so, and as an offensive player, it's just like, man, and as an offensive staff, it's like, like we just didn't do what we needed to do. And I think the thing about the NFL is like this game's going to flush pretty quickly for them because they got a tough one coming up next week. They're going to get back to the drawing board, and that's the process. But in the meantime, I do think I'm sure everyone's disappointed who's involved in this, because it's like they had a plan, whatever the plan was, and it just didn't execute the way they thought it would. And that's tough.
I just think it's tough. Yeah. And I know this one definitively we have to wait till Tuesday, but sometimes the plan is not a good plan.
That's true. But I will say, like, and again, like we're just talking ball here. You think the plan's good on Tuesday or Wednesday. You know what I'm saying? You think that it's the right thing, right? And you believe in it. You spend all this time with it, and it's just tough, man. It's disappointing. It's disappointing when this is the result, for sure. And again, like, a lot of people are going to be pretty upset about it. So
apparently John Allen's one of them. This quote from the locker room that William just shared with us. Since we're live, William, I'm just going to say bleep myself as opposed to making you do this later. I'm bleeping tired of this bleep. I'm bleeping tired of this bull. It's been 7 bleeping years of the same bleep. I'm tired of this bleep. Yeah. John's been here for 7 years and it's the same stuff. And individually, like, yeah, he's played pretty well through most of it. So I can understand where you just look around and you're like, all right, I'm doing everything I can. Like, what the hell? Fans between 1 year and 70 years for some people, it's felt like the same thing. And I get the frustration, and I think that it's important to remember that, like, if you want, you get the 1 or 2 yahoos that are like, if this is the Josh Harris era, then what's the difference? He took over the team on the day before training camp. This is entirely the old operation from a football standpoint. You need an off season, but like, that's been my whole thing. Like, why I'm so frustrated watching this team is because there's not really a lot anyone can do. Like, it is fun to me. This is 100% me speaking. I think this team is fundamentally flawed. I think they're flawed in their makeup. I think their roster is fundamentally flawed. I think the coaching staff is fundamentally flawed. And there's not anything you can do about any of those problems right now. All you can do is week to week hope that they overcome themselves, that they play up to their potential. But here's the thing about average coaches, average players, whether you want to use the word average, mediocre, lackluster, whatever, depending on who we're talking about here, is they're in the league because they're talented. They're in the league because they're capable of good things. But the great ones do it every week. And so you're going to get a week here and there where they convince you that they're good and that they're worthy of your time and your energy and all that kind of stuff. And then a lot of other weeks are going to look like this because every other team has the exact same guys, except for like 5 teams who are actually genuinely really good and like 3 more who are actually genuinely terrible. And so, yeah, could they go out and compete with and beat the Eagles next week? They absolutely could, which is why we watch, because it's fun that way. But like, you're also not immune if you go beat the Eagles from another performance like this. You don't ever figure it out in this league. You just are right more often than you're wrong, or wrong more often than you're right. And the rights and wrongs come together to be your record at the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really good insight there, and it's something that's really challenging, because like you believe, like when you like being on a roster, sitting in the meeting room, you believe every week you're going to win the game. Even when you're bad, like you're like, we got this game. And
the Patriots beat the Bills today.
Yeah, and like the Baltimore Ravens kicked the tar out of the Detroit Lions. Like, I still think
the Lions are good, but like, holy crap, what a win!
Right. Yeah, and like that's the thing is like finding that level of consistency, that mindset. It's a perfect storm every single week for you. And I think there are good coaches, there are good players that increase the likelihood of that. I think, the San Francisco 49ers are an interesting case study because they're well coached and they've got very talented players. But, the composition of the team is similar to other teams in the NFL. You know what I mean? Like they have a second-year quarterback and they've elevated him. They found ways to make that go. And I think
right. Well, that's the difference, right? So like when I talk about this roster being fundamentally flawed, is like they've got a second-year quarterback and they've also got, I know he's not playing today or he's doubtful, but like they've also got Trent Williams. Like they invested in the weapons around him and Christian McCaffrey. Like they got him, not that I think Brian Robinson's a bad football player or Chris Rodriguez or Antonio Gibson, but like what happens if you're in position to draft Bijan Robinson to help Sam Howell? Do you do that? Or do you go do something else? And like you take risks. You draft Jahan Dotson, who most people have a second round grade on in the first round. And I like Jahan a lot as a football player, but like he's got a big drop today. And that was
Yeah.
part of the repertoire for him coming out, was how is he going to handle the physicality and some of this stuff. So like, if you're Ron and you do things your own way all the time and think you're smarter than everyone else with how you run the organization, because you constantly seem to be zigging when everyone else would say zag, like, you better be right, or ultimately, like, Josh Harris is going to make a decision here pretty soon, or at the very least after the season. And that's not me like wishing that on anyone or being overly negative. It's just the reality of like, that's the league.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a lot to add to that. I think, I just would say to fans, to you, that as much as it feels terrible. Like, these guys want to win football games. Obviously, John wants to win football games, and they're doing everything they can to win. It's just it's hard, man. It's hard. It's like, it's so hard to win games. And I know fans are going to hear me say that and be like, yeah, we know it's hard. I don't think you do know how hard it is. It's like everyone, you kind of pour your heart and soul to it every single week, and you don't get the results you want. It's really challenging. And so, what is it? Is it the players? Is it the coaches? Like, there are teams, like, I think take like the Arizona Cardinals are a great example. Like, they are constantly outperforming, what their roster says they should be. And why is that? Is that scheme? Is that approach? Is that making sure you've got the right guys, maybe not physically, but mentally? Like, look at Houston. They were the worst roster in football last year, and now they're like a competitive football team. Like, what's the difference? And it's really hard to know. And I think that's why this game is so fun to talk about. And this is something maybe we should talk about in the offseason some more. But all I can say is that this is a gross feeling for everybody, for fans, for players, for coaches. And all you can do is just keep working and keep getting better. And like you said, like, decisions are going to be made here soon. And I think everyone's aware of that. I can tell you this right now, though. In 2012, we had a similar feeling to this game. Like, we had similarly bad losses. We had similarly bad performances. And for whatever reason, I wish I could tell you it was X, Y, Z. It wasn't. Like, we won a game we probably shouldn't have won. We started believing in ourselves. We started executing a little bit better. We got a little momentum, and that momentum changed the trajectory of that season. Like, that team, that roster that I was on was not like an overly talented roster. Like, you look top to bottom, you're like, Josh Morgan's a receiver. I'm starting at tight end. Darrell Young starting at fullback. Pierre Garçon's receiver. What I mean? Like, it's not like, wow, look at these Hall of Fame names. It's like the sum of the parts became greater than the sum of the individuals. And I think that's something that it's so hard to articulate why and how that happens, but it does happen. And maybe this is the catalyst. Maybe they have a players meeting next week and it turns a quarter. I don't know. I hope it does. But all I'm saying is that it's very, very challenging to do that consistently each and every week. And I know that's what fans want. But it's tough, man. And I hope they can figure it out is really where I'm at.
I do too. And I think it's like, criticism can come without it being personal. These guys want to win, they're trying, all that kind of stuff. But here's a couple things the 2012 team had. It just I wasn't covering the team then. I didn't live in the area then. Like, this is just me post history. You were on the freaking team. So who am I to tell you? But here I go. You had London Fletcher as a leader. And
true. This team's got John Allen.
I don't know, like, with all due respect to John, who I love, I don't get the sense that there's a standard across this whole operation that is as high as like a London Fletcher set it. And I think that's probably something that also stems from a coaching staff that, Ron, after this game, and I know like there's something about a steady hand and don't get too high, don't get too low. When you've got John Allen giving the quote that I gave 5 minutes ago and Ron being like 10 games left to go and just, kind of same guy as he always is. Like, you just had your second loss in 3 weeks that a lot of coaches would just get fired after. Like, straight up, like, the loss to the Bears is the kind of loss. I mean, Nikki wrote it in the post. Remember, that was her lead. It was like, this is the kind of game that gets coaches fired. And you don't get fired then. And part of it is probably the circumstances around of the organization being under new ownership and them still figuring out where everything is. And you have a second kind of loss like that in 3 weeks. And like, there doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency and a sense of crispness and a sense of all that stuff. And even to the point that like when EB came in and was rubbing some people the wrong way with that kind of stuff, and Ron comes in and tries to smooth it over, like part of that was kind of a wake up call of like Eric coming in and like saying, this is how we did it in Kansas City. And it doesn't reflect at all how things were done here. And I know that there's more than one way to do this. You don't have to be as intense as Eric is, or as maybe the way Andy runs things is one way and Belichick runs them another, McVay runs them another. Like, there's different ways to do this. But we're now 4 years into Rivera and he's won 42% of his games. And I just think that between player leadership, coach leadership. There is not a general crispness and urgency to anything that this organization does. And I don't know what that means in terms of act. Like, that's not me saying like the urgency should be fire Rivera 5 minutes ago. That's not what I'm saying. I'm sure all the fans in the comments, the first like 17 comments we had were fire Ron, fire Jack, fire EB, fire everybody. That's not what I mean. But there does need to be, like, if that's how John feels, like, how is that coming through on the practice field? Chase had a quote after the game. He said he needs to lead by example in practice to turn things around. So again, we don't know what's going on in practice. So like, I'm not trying to put, I'm not saying anything in terms of like, I know this is happening. I have no information here. Right. But I'm saying if Chase is saying that, if John is saying that, like, what are you guys doing to turn that around? I don't know. I don't have the access to that information. This is all stuff that happens behind closed doors. You're not behind those, even with your role of the team now, you're not behind those closed doors, but you've been behind those doors with other teams. And so I would ask, like, if you are behind those doors and you are a John, you're a Chase, you're a Terry, you're a whoever, like, how are you getting that sense of urgency? And am I off on the diagnosis here that it does seem like there's a lack of that with the way that the team is responding and the way that you've now had these 2 games against Chicago and New York these last 3 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that the stuff against Chicago was probably affected from a physical standpoint in a different way. Yeah, I think there was a lot of kind of outlier things going on there, and I do think like there's a maturity to a team that's really hard, and I do think the new CBA has made it challenging to kind of cultivate leadership with kind of that middle level NFL guy. You mentioned Fletcher, but in addition to Fletcher, there's Corey Lichtensteiger, there's Will Montgomery, there's guys that do things the right way, that are professionals in the building, Kedrick Golston, Lorenzo Alexander, like those guys are on that 2012 team. And here, like there is a bunch of young guys and there's a bunch of kind of senior guys, the oldest one being Tress Way. And again, I think Tress is a great leader, but I don't care how dynamic you are as a leader. It's hard to do that as a punter, right? And I look at the linebackers are young, safeties are young. Cam is in his 4th year.
Right.
He's like,
but even like John and Terry, who are great leaders, their whole NFL experience is here.
Yeah. No, and I'm with that. I think the thing that I look at, you asked me like what I would do or how I would approach it, and I think back to teams that handled adversity well, and they were just compiled of guys, a bunch of guys who were really good pros. Football was really important to them in a way that is, and I know football is important to everybody who plays in the NFL, but it was like they were like, we're going to stay late, we're going to study more, we're going to handle practice in a very specific way, and eventually the ship just rights itself. If you do things the right way consistently, without being prompted, without being prodded, that's when those are the best teams I've been a part of, is guys who are having, the quarterback, Matt Ryan, when I was in Atlanta, he was like, hey man, we got all the receivers. We're going to review some film real quick. I'll get some pizza. Let's get it done. And like, is that happening here with a young quarterback at the helm? Probably not. Like, and that's not an indictment of Sam. That's just like, again, there are, like you pointed out, there are some interesting leadership vacancies based on how they've constructed the roster. And again, I've been on part of teams like this too, with young quarterbacks, guys that don't know exactly what's going on. But you got to be smart about the guys you have around the team to kind of promote and make the culture that you want. But in terms of like what's different, like again, in 2012, it wasn't like we came to work the next day and we're like, man, we're going to do stuff differently. It was like we just took that same group and doubled down our focus. And then every loss we had, the focus got doubled down, and there wasn't a lot of like, negativity. It was just like we had dudes that football was really important to, and every day they came to work and they came to get better. And that was it. And like they took a lot of that group. I have a lot of respect for everyone in that group. They took a ton of personal accountability. Like, I can do this better. I will be better. I'm going to try and get this done. And Fletch is like that. Fletch, like even to this day, you talk about some of the stuff that happened in 2012 that he regrets. And he was like, I knew XYZ then, and I wish I would have done that. Like, what are we? We're like 20 years later almost. Like, and he's
not
still
quite that
talking.
long.
But,
I know we're old now, but it's only 11 years.
But like that is the type of guy, the guy that are saying like, what can I do more? And then they bring everybody with you. So again, that's been my experience. Again, in 10 years, that was the best. The best teams I was a part of, everyone was like that. And that's a decision that's made by the staff. That's a decision made by guys in the team. And we'll see. Like I've said this every time they've lost. It's only a negative if they don't learn anything from it and get better. That's the only reason it's negative. Like, I know that's hard for fans to hear, but that has been my experience from like AYSO soccer out in California, through UCLA, through the NFL, and now coaching high school football. It's only bad if you don't learn anything from it. And so EB, as a first-time play caller, does he learn something from this? I hope so. Does he say, man, like this plan wasn't exactly what I thought? How do I humble myself and kind of find a better solution earlier in the game? Great. Then next time it's not going to happen. And I think that's what I'd say is, like, if the staff and if the team is composed the right way, they will be better from this. And I think that's the thing that I am hoping. And I don't know, because like you said, I don't have any insight into like what's going on behind closed doors, but that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah. I think that's what makes this loss so frustrating, is because you look at the Bears game and
you kind of hope that was the one, right?
Hope that was the one that would teach you. But again, if you want to put an optimist spin on it, they are just 3-4. They played Philly really tough a couple weeks ago. This one's at home. FedEx hasn't exactly been kind to the Commanders this year, but theoretically that should be an advantage. And maybe they learn, there's some stuff they liked in that game. I don't know, man. There's a lot we left on the table too. A couple of defensive guys who didn't have the best days. There's some decision making from Rivera that we can get into I mean, like, ultimately, like, dude, it wasn't a good game. Like I think that's, like, as much as we, like we got a little distracted there talking about ownership and leadership and all this stuff, but the game, I feel fans, it wasn't as productive or anything that they wanted it to be, and I think we both can acknowledge that. And I think we're both frustrated by it. But yeah, like it's a tough spot for the team to be in, and it's not ideal. But again, like, I'm going to say this again: if the team's built the right way, they'll be able to turn it around. And depending on who you ask, you might not think that they're built the right way, but that's a conversation for another time. Yeah. Part of that conversation will be on Thursday or on Tuesday, and then you guys get to hear it on Wednesday, because we'll have a better sense of what the plan was by watching the tape. We'll get into some of the decision making by Rivera as well, in terms of go for it or not on that 4th and 3, whether to accept the penalty before the first Giants touchdown. Like, there was literally something for everyone in this game, and none of the some things were very good. That is how you lose 14-7 to a 1-5 team in the NFL. All right. That's it for the Instant Reaction Show. We will talk to you guys next time on Take Command. Make sure you're subscribed for all of your podcasting needs, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, free Odyssey app. And then other than that, I'll see you guys on the radio, 4 to 7 p.m. on the Team 980 for the Hoffman Show. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.